I never thought cruelty could sound so casual, almost playful, until that night at the dinner table. My sister-in-law Daisy leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine with that satisfied smirk she always wore when she thought she had the upper hand. "Too bad your baby looks nothing like your husband," she said, her words slicing through the warm chatter like ice water poured over fire. The laughter that followed from the others felt like a tidal wave crashing over me. My husband's laugh was the loudest, though weak nervous, but loud enough to cut me in half. I sat there, still my fork frozen in midair, my heart thudding so loud it drowned out every sound except their laughter. For days I had prepared for this dinner, scrubbing every corner of the house, cooking a meal that had taken nearly 8 hours, laying out the china we only used for the most special occasions. I had gone to 3 different flower shops just to find the perfect autumn centerpiece. Every detail was chosen because after 3 years of marriage, I was still desperately trying to prove that I belonged in Jared's family, still trying to show that I was worthy of being his wife, worthy of carrying their last name. But in that single moment, as Daisy's cruel words hung in the air, everything I had worked for unraveled. I turned to Jared, praying no begging for him to defend me, to defend us, to stand up and tell his sister that her comment wasn't just inappropriate but deeply cruel, that our son George was beautiful, perfect, and undeniably his. But instead, my husband chuckled, that hollow, gutless sound. "Maybe Olivia has a secret," he said. The world seemed to tilt. My body felt cold, as if someone had poured frost directly into my veins. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the silence of what he didn't say. He didn't defend me. He didn't defend our son. He threw me to the wolves, all for the approval of a family that never truly accepted me. I scanned their faces in the chandelier light. Patricia, my mother-in-law, who had insisted I call her Mom, but always with that faint hesitation in her tone, she giggled behind her napkin like a schoolgirl. Robert, my father-in-law, sipped his whiskey with a chuckle, his eyes glittering with something closer to satisfaction than humor. Even Rebecca, Jared's cousin, whom I had thought liked me, pressed her hand over her mouth, her eyes sparkling with malicious delight. I thought the deepest cut had already landed. But no, it was Maria, our housekeeper, who lingered in the doorway holding dessert plates. Maria, who had seen me cry from exhaustion when George was a newborn. Maria, who knew how fiercely I loved my son. Her kind eyes widened, and in them I saw pity. That pity crushed me almost as much as Jared's betrayal. And upstairs, my baby slept peacefully, unaware that the people who should have loved him most were using his very existence as a punchline. The monitor on the table whispered his soft breaths while laughter poisoned the air below. It wasn't the first time Jared had planted seeds of doubt about George. I remembered the whispers in the dark. "His nose looks too sharp for our family." Or the casual questions about timing. "Are you sure about the dates?" His eyes studying our baby, not with wonder, but suspicion, as though he were searching for evidence against me. I made excuses, as wives do. I told myself he was just adjusting to fatherhood, that his distance was normal, temporary. I convinced myself that love would smooth over his doubts. But deep down I knew. I knew the soil of suspicion was fertile, and Jared had been planting seeds since the moment George was placed in my arms. But this dinner, this public humiliation, was a line I could no longer ignore. My chest felt hollow, but inside that hollowness something sharp began to form, a clarity, a fire. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't give them the scene they craved. Instead I stood. The scrape of my chair against the hardwood silenced the room. Every eye followed me as I smoothed my dress and walked out, not to escape, not to collapse behind a locked door, but to retrieve the one thing that could silence them all. From beneath the pearls Jared had given me for our anniversary, I pulled out the envelope I had hidden for months. Its weight was heavier than paper should be heavy, with secrets, heavy with truth. For weeks I had carried it like a weapon, waiting for the right moment to unsheath it. Tonight, under the cruel glow of Daisy's smirk and Jared's betrayal, was that moment. I returned to the dining room, my steps measured, deliberate. They looked at me with confusion, some with faint amusement, thinking perhaps I had gone to collect myself. They didn't know that I had gone to collect their undoing. I placed the envelope in front of Jared. "Since we're sharing secrets tonight," I said evenly, "open this." For a heartbeat he smirked, still clinging to that arrogance. But as his eyes scanned the letterhead DNA paternity testing laboratory, his face drained of color, his hands trembled as he gripped the page. His lips parted, then closed, then opened again, but no words came out. The silence grew thick. Even Daisy leaned forward now, vulture-like, eager to snatch the paper from his hand. But I was quicker. I laid my palm flat across the page. "Let your son explain," I said, my voice calm, almost cold. "Let him explain why he's been accusing me for months." The truth spread through the room like wildfire. They understood now. This wasn't just a joke or a slip of the tongue. This was months of whispered suspicion, of calculated cruelty now dragged into the light. Jared tried to speak, but his words cracked. "Olivia, this isn't. We were just joking." "Joking." I echoed, my voice sharp enough to slice steel. "Is that what you call questioning your son's very existence? Is that what you call months of planting doubt in the walls of our home?" His mother trembled. His father put down his fork, his jaw clenched. Rebecca shifted in her seat, guilt flickering across her face. Daisy's smirk faltered, her confidence unraveling. I lifted George from his high chair, his chubby little fingers reaching for my earrings as he babbled happily. His innocence was a stark contrast to the ugliness around us. I held him close, his warmth against my chest, my armor in that moment. "This is our son," I said quietly, but with a force that shook the table. And in that silence, in that pause where truth needed no embellishment, I felt power return to me. The envelope had not only silenced their laughter, it had transformed me. The silence after I placed that envelope on the table was heavier than any storm I had ever endured. For years I had fought to belong at that table, pouring myself into every family dinner, every holiday, every forced smile. But in that moment it was no longer about belonging, it was about truth. And truth had a way of cutting through pretense like glass. Jared's face twisted with disbelief, his knuckles white as he clutched the paper. You really went this far?" His voice cracked between shame and anger, though I could tell it wasn't anger at himself, it was anger at me for daring to expose him. I stared at him with the stillness I didn't know I was capable of. "Far. You questioned your own child's existence. You planted seeds of doubt. You let your family laugh at me, at us. This is as far as I needed to go to protect George." George stirred in my arms, his tiny hand wrapping around my necklace. His presence steadied me. My son was innocent, untouched by this poisonous performance. I had vowed to protect him, and tonight, for the first time, I truly felt like I was honoring that vow. Patricia broke the silence, her voice tight. "Olivia, you must understand Jared was just under pressure. Men say things, families joke." I turned on her, the weight of years of subtle cruelty sharpening every syllable that left my mouth. "Joke. Do you know how many nights I lay awake while your son looked at me like a stranger? Do you know what it feels like to rock a newborn to sleep while wondering if your husband is silently questioning whether he is his? Do you know the loneliness of carrying that weight while the family that should have protected me sharpened their knives behind my back?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. For once, Patricia, queen of polished insults and half-hearted endearments, had no words. Robert cleared his throat as if preparing to mediate, but I raised a hand. "Don't. Don't you dare minimize this. I have been silent long enough." Daisy's smirk returned, though weaker this time. "Well, if you're so confident, why did you even need a test? Sounds like a guilty conscience to me." The room gasped softly at her audacity, but I didn't flinch. I stepped closer to her, the envelope still in Jared's trembling hands. "I needed a test because of you. Because of every whisper, every sneer, every look exchanged across this table. I needed to protect myself and my child from people who couldn't wait to brand me a liar, a cheater, an outsider." And now I leaned forward, my voice low, deliberate. "Now the truth is in black and white. And you, Daisy, will never laugh at my son again." She looked away, her face flushed, her grip tightening on her wineglass until I half expected it to shatter. Rebecca shifted uneasily, her earlier laughter now replaced with something that looked suspiciously like shame. I remembered how she had once confided in me about her failed marriage, how I had held her hand through her tears. Yet when the chance came to show me the same loyalty, she had joined the chorus of laughter. Betrayal, I realized, wasn't always shouted. Sometimes it was whispered in giggles and complicit silence. Jared slammed the paper back on the table. Fine, he's mine. Is that what you wanted? Congratulations, Olivia. You've humiliated me in front of my entire family. The words were like acid, but this time I didn't let them sink into my skin. I straightened my shoulders. No, Jared, you humiliated yourself. By doubting me, by doubting him, by laughing instead of standing by your wife. I gave you every chance to be my partner, my protector, my equal. And you chose to be their pawn instead. The chandelier flickered above us, the clinking of silverware long stilled. Even Maria, who had remained in the doorway, held her breath. For the first time I saw recognition in her eyes, not pity, not sympathy, but respect. She knew I had finally reclaimed my voice. I turned my attention back to the table, to the faces that had judged me from the day I walked into their mansion as Jared's new bride. All of you should be ashamed. You welcomed me into this family with smiles and sweet words, but underneath you sharpened your cruelty like blades. You thought I was too desperate for acceptance to ever fight back. But here I am standing holding proof in my hands while you all sit in your silence. Look at yourselves. The weight of my words lingered in the air. For a moment no one moved. George babbled softly, his tiny voice a reminder that life could be innocent even in the midst of poison. I placed him gently back in his high chair, my fingers lingering against his soft curls, before I turned back to Jared. You wanted to know the truth. Here it is. I no longer care about earning your family's approval. I don't need their acceptance to validate my worth. And I will not raise my son in a home where suspicion, cruelty, and laughter at his expense are treated as tradition. The realization hit me as I spoke it. I wasn't just defending George, I was freeing myself. For too long I had been shackled by the hope that love would be enough to soften Jared, to win over Patricia, to silence Daisy. But love without respect is a prison, and I was done serving a sentence I hadn't earned. Jared's chair scraped back violently as he stood. His voice was raw, desperate. Where are you going with this, Olivia? What do you want, applause? Do you want them to suddenly love you? It's never going to happen. I met his rage with calm. No, Jared. I don't want their love anymore. I want freedom. I want dignity. I want my son to grow up knowing his mother didn't bow her head to cruelty. I want him to see what it means to stand when others try to push you down. The fire in my chest no longer felt like anger. It felt like clarity. I had spent years bending myself to fit into a mold this family had carved, shrinking pieces of myself to keep the peace. But peace built on silence isn't peace, it's surrender. I took George's diaper bag from the corner of the room, slung it over my shoulder, and lifted him into my arms once more. His small body curled against me, his breath warm on my neck. The only warmth I needed. You've all had your laugh tonight, I said, my voice steady, unwavering. But the story you'll remember won't be about me being the outsider. It will be about the night your cruelty was dragged into the light and silenced. Without waiting for their response, I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard Patricia call out weakly, "Olivia, please." But the plea rang hollow. The night air hit me like a baptism, cool and cleansing as I stepped outside. The weight of their laughter, their judgment, their whispers, it all seemed to fall away with each step. My son's head rested against my shoulder, and I whispered softly to him, "We're free now, George. We're finally free." But freedom is never just a single step. It's a journey. And though I had taken the first, I knew the road ahead would test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine. Because betrayal doesn't end with one cruel dinner, it lingers, it festers, and sometimes it follows you into places you thought were safe. And as I drove away from the house that night, I couldn't help but wonder if Jared or his family would ever truly let me go. The road stretched out in front of me like a ribbon of darkness, headlights carving a fragile path through the night. George slept in his car seat, his soft breaths audible over the low hum of the engine. For the first time in years, I felt both utterly alone and strangely alive. I had walked out, I had spoken the truth, and I had carried my child away from the poison of that house. But as the adrenaline ebbed, questions swarmed in its place. What now? Where would we go? How would I rebuild a life when the foundation I had clung to had just been shattered. I drove aimlessly at first, circling through neighborhoods where families gathered in warm living rooms, where laughter probably sounded the way it should, gentle, not cruel. My own laughter felt like a distant memory. Finally, I pulled into a motel off the interstate, its neon sign flickering against the wet pavement. It was nothing like the home Jared and I had shared, but for once that felt like a blessing. I needed plain walls, silence, and anonymity. As I carried George inside, I thought back to the beginning, before the whispers, before the suspicion, before his family's cruelty became the air I breathed. When Jared and I met, he had seemed so different from the rest of them. He had courted me with sincerity, or so I thought. He spoke about building a family, creating a future together. But now I realized those words had been less about love and more about acquisition. I hadn't been chosen for who I was. I had been chosen to fit into his narrative, to play the role his family demanded. And when I didn't bend easily enough, they pushed harder, chipped at my edges, until they thought they could break me. I laid George on the bed, watching his small chest rise and fall. He was the only pure thing left from that union, the only thing untouched by lies. But even his existence had been used as a weapon against me. My stomach twisted at the memory of Jared's laugh at the table, that hollow sound that had cut me deeper than any knife. The next morning, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Jared, Patricia, even Daisy. I let them all go to voicemail. But when I saw Maria's name flash across the screen, I answered. Her voice was hushed. Mrs. Olivia, I don't know if I should be calling, but you need to know. After you left, they turned on Jared. My breath caught. What do you mean? They said he embarrassed them, that he made the family look foolish by letting it get this far. Daisy told him he was weak, that he'd let you control the narrative. His mother, she said he should never have married you in the first place. The words burned, but they didn't surprise me. They had always seen me as a mistake Jared needed to correct. Thank you, Maria, I whispered, for everything. She hesitated, then said softly, You were the only one who ever treated me like family. Don't let them break you. After the call, I sat for a long time, staring at the sunlight creeping across the motel carpet. Maria's words lodged in my chest like a fragile seed. Don't let them break you. But Jared wasn't going to let me go easily. That evening, an email arrived, short, cold, unmistakably him. Come home. We need to talk. If you think you're walking away with George, you're wrong. My hands trembled as I read it. The threat wasn't subtle. He wasn't asking me to return. He was warning me of the war he was about to start. I called Rebecca, one of the few family members who hadn't joined in the cruelty as loudly as the others. When she answered, her voice was shaky. Olivia, I wanted to say I'm sorry. I should have defended you. Her apology felt late, but not meaningless. Why didn't you? I asked. Because no one ever stands up to them, she whispered. We've all been afraid of Robert and Patricia our whole lives. But last night, watching you, she paused, her voice breaking. You did what the rest of us never had the courage to do. And now, Jared's planning something. I heard him on the phone with a lawyer this morning. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Of course he was. Jared wasn't just a cruel husband, he was his parents' son. If he couldn't silence me with suspicion and laughter, he'd try to use the courts, the law, the very system that so often favored men like him. I spent that night drafting a plan. I called a lawyer I had once met through a women's shelter where I volunteered. I explained everything, the dinner, the paternity test, the threats. She listened carefully, then said, You have more than you realize. His behavior, the public humiliation, the written threats, these will matter. But Olivia, you have to be ready. Men like Jared don't just fight, they destroy. Her words echoed as I watched George sleep. Was I ready for a war? Could I really fight, not just Jared, but the entire weight of his family's wealth and influence? The next week blurred into a series of confrontations. Jared filed for emergency custody, claiming I was unstable and had kidnapped George. The hypocrisy was staggering but not surprising. He even submitted statements from his family, each one painting me as paranoid, hysterical, manipulative. Reading Patricia's affidavit felt like swallowing glass. Olivia has always been dramatic. She creates problems where there are none. We worry about George's well-being and her care. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the pages apart. But my lawyer reminded me, their lies will collapse under the weight of evidence. Stay calm. Gather your truth. So I did. I collected every text where Jared questioned George's paternity, every voicemail where he threatened me. Even Maria agreed to testify about what she had witnessed, the laughter, the cruelty, the venom disguised as jokes. Slowly, piece by piece, I built my own arsenal. But the most shocking revelation didn't come from Jared or his family. It came from my own mother. She called one evening, her voice heavy with something I couldn't quite name. "Olivia," she began, "there's something I should have told you years ago. Something about your father's will." My chest tightened. "What about it?" "He left you a trust, a significant one. But I never told you because I knew Jared's family. I knew they would find a way to get their hands on it if they knew. I thought I was protecting you." The room spun. A trust, hidden all these years. How much I whispered. "Enough to free you," she said simply. "Enough to make sure you never need a cent from Jared or his family again." Tears welled in my eyes. For years I had felt powerless, cornered by their wealth, their influence, their arrogance. But now suddenly I had something they couldn't touch. My father, even in death, had given me the weapon I needed. When I hung up, I sat in the quiet motel room, George curled against me, and for the first time since walking out of that dinner, I didn't feel afraid. I felt steady. The road ahead was still treacherous, but I finally had ground to stand on. The battle with Jared was far from over. Court dates loomed, threats escalated, secrets unraveled faster than I could process them. But beneath it all, a strange calm had taken root. Because no matter how loud their laughter, no matter how sharp their words, I knew this truth once revealed cannot be buried again. And I had truth on my side. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and stale air, the kind of place where lives could be broken with the stroke of a pen. I clutched George's blanket in one hand and the folder of evidence in the other, my heart pounding as if it could be heard by everyone around me. This wasn't just a fight for custody, it was a fight for dignity, for the right to raise my son free from a family that had tried to erase me with laughter and suspicion. Jared stood across the aisle, flanked by Patricia and Robert, like generals at war. His suit was pressed, his hair immaculate, but his eyes were wild. I recognized that look. It was the same look he wore whenever control slipped through his fingers. He didn't just want George. He wanted to crush me, to make me regret ever daring to stand against him. When the judge entered, the room hushed. My lawyer rose first, her voice calm, deliberate. She laid out the timeline, the paternity accusations, the public humiliation, the cruel laughter at dinner, the threats Jared had sent afterward. One by one, she presented the evidence, texts, voicemails, Maria's sworn statement. Each piece was another crack in the perfect image Jared had spent years curating. Then Jared's lawyer rose. His arguments were rehearsed, polished, dripping with disdain. He painted me as unstable, emotional, a woman who had kidnapped her own son in a fit of paranoia. Patricia's affidavit was read aloud, her words slicing through me like knives. "Olivia has always been dramatic. We fear for George's safety under her care." I sat frozen, my nails digging crescents into my palms. But when it was my turn, I stood. My voice trembled at first, but I steadied it with each word. "I am not perfect," I began, "but I am a mother. I have fed George, bathed him, held him through fevers, and sung him to sleep when no one else would. I have carried the weight of being questioned, doubted, and ridiculed, not just as a wife, but as a mother. And through it all, my son has never known hunger or neglect or cruelty. What he has known is love. Mine." I looked directly at Jared then. "This is not about stability. This is about control. About a man who doubted his own child and allowed his family to laugh at his wife for sport. About people who cared more about appearances than truth. And I will not let my son grow up thinking that kind of cruelty is normal." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge's pen paused mid-scribble. Then came Maria's testimony. She described the dinner, her voice breaking as she recalled the laughter, the humiliation, the way I had stood with George in my arms. "I've worked in that house for 8 years," she said softly, "and I have never once seen Olivia treat that child with anything but love. But I have seen her treated with disrespect, suspicion, and cruelty more times than I can count. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Daisy avoided my gaze altogether. When Jared took the stand, he was defiant at first. He insisted his suspicions were light-hearted, his laughter just nerves. But under cross-examination, the mask slipped. My lawyer pressed him about the texts, the repeated accusations, the threats. His answers grew scattered, angry, defensive. Finally, the judge raised a hand. "Enough! I have heard enough." The room froze. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice firm, "you did not merely question paternity, you used it as a weapon. You allowed your wife to be publicly humiliated and failed to protect the dignity of your child. This court will not reward such behavior." Jared's face drained of color. The gavel struck once. Temporary custody is awarded to the mother. The father will have supervised visitation pending further evaluation. This matter is adjourned. The sound of the gavel echoed like thunder. I clutched George's blanket, tears spilling silently down my cheeks. It wasn't the end, but it was a victory, a declaration that I wasn't crazy, I wasn't unstable. I was a mother fighting for her child. But victories come with consequences. Outside the courthouse, Patricia cornered me, her voice low and venomous. "Do you think this is over? You've humiliated us. You've made our family a spectacle. You'll regret this." I met her glare with steady eyes. "The only thing I regret is ever thinking I needed your approval." She recoiled as if the words themselves burned. For once, I didn't feel small under her gaze. I felt untouchable. In the weeks that followed, the cracks in their facade widened. Jared's firm began to unravel when whispers of the custody case reached his clients. Daisy's marriage faltered after her husband learned of the cruel games she played at dinner. Even Robert and Patricia, who had built their reputations on respectability, found themselves whispered about at galas and fundraisers. The perfect family image was splintering, not because of me, but because truth has a way of spreading like wildfire once lit. And yet, even in their collapse, they tried to pull me back in. Jared sent flowers with notes scrawled in desperation. "We can fix this. Come home. Think of George." Patricia left voicemails dripping with false sweetness. "We miss you. Families fight, but we always come back together." But I wasn't fooled. Their words weren't about love or reconciliation, they were about control. They wanted me to step back into the cage I had escaped. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. I moved into a small townhouse, humble, but mine. I painted the walls soft shades of blue and yellow, filled the shelves with books I loved, and hung photos of George that radiated joy. It wasn't a mansion, but it was home. Our home. At night when George was asleep, I opened the file my mother had given me about the trust. The numbers were staggering. My father had left enough to secure not just my future, but George's. Enough to ensure we would never be at the mercy of Jared or his family again. For the first time, I realized I didn't just have to survive, I could thrive. But freedom, I learned, doesn't erase scars. I still woke some nights hearing the echo of their laughter, still felt the sting of Jared's betrayal. Healing wasn't a straight path, it was jagged, uneven, full of relapses. Yet each morning when I held George in my arms and whispered promises of a better future, I knew I was moving forward, step by step. One evening, Rebecca visited. She sat at my kitchen table, her eyes tired but sincere. "You were right," she said softly. "We've all been complicit. We let them dictate everything. But you broke it. You broke the cycle." Her words settled deep in my chest. Maybe this wasn't just my story. Maybe it was a story for every woman who had ever been silenced at a dinner table, laughed at for daring to exist outside of someone else's mold. Still, the war wasn't over. Jared was bitter, vengeful. His supervised visits were tense, filled with glares and veiled threats. And Patricia's influence still loomed like a shadow. I knew another storm was coming, but this time I wasn't afraid. Because storms can only destroy what isn't rooted, and I was finally learning how to plant myself in solid ground. The night of that dinner had been their weapon, their performance of cruelty. But it had also been my awakening. I had walked out with nothing but an envelope and my son, and somehow that had been enough. Enough to silence their laughter. Enough to begin again. The months that followed felt like walking through the aftermath of a storm, quiet, but with debris still scattered everywhere. Jared's presence lingered like smoke seeping into moments when I should have felt safe. His supervised visits with George were supposed to be neutral controlled, but I saw the venom in his eyes every time he looked at me. He still believed he could break me, still thought I would one day crawl back out of fear or exhaustion. But what Jared didn't understand was that fear no longer ruled me. That night at dinner had burned away my illusions. His laughter, his betrayal, his family's cruelty, they had stripped me down to the core of who I was. And what was left was someone he no longer recognized. One afternoon during a supervised visit, Jared leaned close enough for the monitor not to hear and hissed, "You think you've won, Olivia. Custody isn't permanent. I'll take him from you. And when I do, you'll have nothing." I stared at him steadily, my voice calm but firm. "The only thing you've lost, Jared, is the right to call yourself a father. And that's something no court ruling will ever restore." The supervisor noted his outburst. My lawyer filed the report the same day. Each threat he made became another nail in the coffin he was building for himself. But Jared's unraveling went beyond family court. His career, once the golden crown he wore so proudly, began to crumble. Clients pulled out when whispers of the custody case turned into headlines. His firm, desperate to protect its reputation, quietly pushed him out. For a man who had built his entire identity on power and control, it was a death sentence. Patricia and Robert tried to salvage what was left. They hosted dinners with their society friends, plastering smiles over the cracks. But people whispered, people remembered, and slowly the invitations stopped coming. Daisy's marriage collapsed, her husband citing irreconcilable cruelty. Even Rebecca, who had once kept her head down, began to distance herself, no longer willing to play the role of silent accomplice. The mighty Mitchell family, once untouchable, was rotting from within. But my life was finally beginning to bloom. The trust my father had left me gave me the means to build something I had once thought impossible. I found a small office space downtown and began working with a women's advocacy group, helping mothers like me who had been silenced, doubted, or crushed under the weight of powerful families. I told my story carefully, not as gossip, but as testimony. And each time I saw a woman's eyes fill with recognition, I knew I wasn't alone. George grew stronger, happier. His laughter, real laughter, pure and untainted, became the sound that filled my home. At night, when I tucked him into bed, I whispered to him, "You are wanted, you are loved, and no one will ever make you doubt that." But the final turning point came unexpectedly. It was a gray morning when I was called back into court for the custody review. Jared arrived late, his suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He looked nothing like the polished man I had once married. He looked broken, hollow. The judge reviewed the reports, Jared's outbursts, his threats, his unstable behavior during visits. Then she looked directly at him. "Mr. Mitchell, your conduct demonstrates a consistent inability to prioritize your child's well-being over your own bitterness. Custody will remain with the mother. Your visitation rights are suspended until you undergo counseling and provide evidence of change." Jared erupted. "This is ridiculous. She turned everyone against me. She poisoned him against me." His voice cracked with desperation, his fist slamming against the table. The judge's gavel struck sharply. "Enough! If you cannot control yourself in this courtroom, you certainly cannot be trusted with a child." And just like that, it was over. The man who once laughed at me across a glittering dinner table had been reduced to a cautionary tale, his power stripped, his arrogance silenced. As I carried George out of the courthouse, Patricia approached me one last time. Her voice was brittle, her eyes sharp with pride, even in defeat. "You've destroyed this family," she said bitterly. I stopped, looked her straight in the eye, and said quietly, "No. You destroyed yourselves the moment you chose cruelty over kindness." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. For once, silence was hers to carry. Life after that was not perfect, but it was free. My townhouse became a sanctuary filled with laughter and warmth instead of suspicion. George grew surrounded by people who cherished him for who he was, not for the games he represented. And I grew into someone I barely recognized, a woman no longer defined by fear, but by resilience. Sometimes late at night, I would remember that dinner. The sound of their laughter, the heat of humiliation in my chest, the moment when I thought I might shatter. And then I would remember standing tall, placing the envelope on the table, and watching the truth silence them all. That moment had been the end of one life and the beginning of another. The lesson I carry, the one I share with every woman who crosses my path, is simple but unshakable. Laughter can wound, betrayal can break, but truth has a power no cruelty can silence. And when you finally claim it, you are no longer the victim of their story, you become the author of your own. So, to anyone listening, anyone who has ever been mocked, doubted, or silenced, remember this. You are stronger than their laughter. You are more powerful than their suspicion. And one day, when you rise, their cruelty will collapse under the weight of your truth. If my story has touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment and tell me your story because your voice matters. And together we can drown out the cruelty with something louder: truth, resilience, and hope.